introduce our next speaker. He's Austin. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you, Pani Natalia, and thank you for being with us.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Looking good? All right, super. Okay, so hello, it's nice to be with you all today. This is my presentation. I'm going to talk about a virtual online teaching experience that I recently had. And I especially want to talk about how I used play and humor in that particular context. So I was in Japan when I had this class, when I was doing these classes, but it was a digital class with the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv and the Department of State through their English language programs. It was a virtual program. And so it was interesting because I was in Japan teaching online in Ukraine, and now I recently moved back to the USA. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning here. I've been all over, but I've had a lot of fun doing it all. So I just want to start with something that I find pretty heartwarming and also pretty impressive, which is this, that humor is one of the few universals that applies to all peoples, to all languages throughout the world. So this means no matter where you're from, no matter what language you speak, everybody laughs. Everybody finds something funny. Everybody has fun. And yet, humor and play are sometimes treated as incompatible with like serious learning professional environments, right? So in this presentation, I really want to explore how purposeful, intentional humor integrated into a lesson can be a tool for participation and even communicative risk-taking, and that leads to more language development. So these are the things that I'm going to discuss today. We have the context, of course, first, so I'll give you some background information on who I was teaching with and my students and where I was teaching and what that program was like. Then I'll talk about some research that supports the benefits of humor and play in lessons, in education in particular. And then I'll give you some examples from my classroom and some of the funny things that we did and things that happened with my students. And I'm really happy to see Marina here. Hi, shout out to Marina. I see her. She was one of my contacts at the school that I taught with, so I'm really excited that she's here. Okay. So you can see this was part of my proposal for this particular presentation. So this presentation explores the role of play and humor in an online English for law enforcement course delivered through the virtual exchange or the virtual English program, virtual educator program with undergraduate students in Ukraine during a period of ongoing conflict. In high-stakes professional context shaped by ongoing instability, students engaged with English as a tool for future roles in public service while navigating emotional and situational challenges. So the things I want to pull out of here is the fact that it was virtual. So it was online instruction via the Virtual Educator Project, and that's with the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. These were undergraduate students, so they were first and second year students. I had two groups of lovely students, 13 in one and 14 in the other, and they were pretty mixed ability. I had some students that could hold a full conversation with me and some students that were maybe a little more shy and a little more limited, but they were all so lovely. And it was an English for Specific Purposes course, specifically English for law enforcement. The school at which I was teaching was Odessa State University of Internal Affairs in Odessa. So all of the students were planning for some kind of future in law enforcement. It was 2 hours a week for 10 weeks. Okay, so 2 hours a week for each group. So I had 2 hours with one group and 2 hours with the other group. Now, I want to discuss a little bit more what I mean by high stakes professional context shaped by ongoing instability. I think we all get the ongoing instability part, unfortunately, but I do want to talk about what I mean by high stakes. So, first of all, high stakes for professional consequences. So this is one of the things that kind of makes it high stakes because students are preparing for careers in law enforcement. My students were. And so this means that if they make communication errors, that can have real world consequences, not necessarily in my class, right? But once they leave my class and start their careers and start using English, then it becomes a little bit more serious, right? And so they know this, they're aware of this, they're extremely intelligent students. And so they know that they need to get it right. And so that puts a little bit more pressure on them. And also, language is tied to authority and responsibility and decision making. So this kind of means that they're not just studying a topic for academic reasons and to pass the class. Maybe some are, right? But it's really going to be instrumental for their future jobs. A lot of my students told me that there's a new mandate in Ukraine that all of them, if you're going to be working in law enforcement, then you need to have a certain level of English by a certain time of year. So they know that this is important, and that makes it high stakes. Another one is about identity formation. So students are not just learning language, they're practicing how to present themselves as professionals, not only in Ukrainian or their first language, but also in English, specifically in English. And they're talking about some pretty big topics, ethics, social responsibility, public service. And so that kind of raises the stakes because it's tied to who they're going to become as professionals, not just what they know now. And that's a big deal. In addition, there's also communicative pressure in the L2 in English. So regardless of their current level, they're going to be asked to discuss complex, serious topics, particularly in my class, but also when they get their, future careers. And so if they're not able to express themselves, that pressure builds. And so that adds a lot of cognitive and emotional stress. And lastly, again, we all really unfortunately know what this means, but I do want to touch on it for those who might be joining that are not, aware with what's going on in Ukraine or not from Ukraine. So this context was shaped by ongoing instability. The students are learning while living through daily war-related disruption. We had air raids during classes and before classes. They had things going on with family outside of the classroom, and they're managing, stress and uncertainty, possible interruptions. You never know when something's going to happen. It's extremely stressful, and it adds emotional and practical weight. Just showing up to class is sometimes just hard, right? And participating and being present, that can be, not present in terms of coming to class, but also just like present in terms of being there and being ready and participating. So all of these things were factors. Now, this session in particular examines, again, how purposeful integration of play can support this engagement without diminishing this professional focus. So it is high stakes, right? This class did feel super important, but I think that especially because of that, that it needed to kind of be a little lightened. It needed to have lighthearted moments. They needed to laugh, right? So I want to discuss specifically why this is important, especially in these kinds of more stressful professional focused types of contents. Now, when I talk about play and humor, I'm talking about play beyond what is called sanctioned play. So those sanctioned play is like the games that we plan, right? The things that we want to incorporate intentionally into the lesson. So these are like the games that we do, the kind of fun activities that we plan. And so going beyond sanctioned play to unsanctioned play. So this is the more spontaneous responses that are built around the prior, more serious talk. So maybe we're doing an activity that is kind of serious, or they're really focused on, but integrating play into that. So I'm going to talk about both. So I don't just want you to think about play as the games that I planned or the activities that I planned. It's also unsanctioned play that just kind of happens spontaneously. And when I talk about humor, I'm talking about things that are funny, but also things that are just fun. Okay. And on the screen here, you can see one of my lovely students. He had one of the best smiles. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, so moving on to the research-based part that supports the integration of play into the classroom, particularly with language learning. So there's three things that I'm going to point out in this regard. So first is promoting a focus on form, okay? So specifically the kind of formulaic elements of language learning. Providing opportunities for learners to develop sociolinguistic competence or pragmatic competence, maybe even communicative competence, and then also contributing to a classroom culture that supports and encourages participation. So these are the three things that I pulled out of the literature that I want to explore a little bit more. So the first one I want to dive into is the promotion of focus on form. So humor often draws attention to pronunciation, grammar, word choice, pattern in language. And this happens through the playful manipulation of language that can take many different forms. And it makes it more noticeable and it makes it more memorable. So when someone is playing with language, people are noticing the language. And because it's kind of set up within a humorous context, it's actually more memorable. So learners, they can experiment with language more freely during playful interaction. So here specifically, I want to give some kind of examples of what this can look like. So one of them could be, for example, puns, right? So here you see specifically, according to the theme of my classes, law enforcement, you see a police pun right here on the screen. Police puns aren't funny, so give it a rest. Ha, ha, ha. And so you can start the lessons this way, bringing in a pun and discussing how this word arrest compared to a rest, but when it's said very quickly, arrest, and how that kind of changes the meaning and how we can play with words in that way. Another one is playful repetition. So one thing in particular that I would do, of course, with students, as I'm sure many of you do, when kind of drilling new vocabulary words, especially, making sure that they've got that intonation right, that they've got the word stress right. So I might say, with the students, maybe the word is suspicious, right? So there's a lot going on in that word, suspicious, suspicious. There's three syllables there. The stress is on the second one. It's suspicious. It's not suspicious or suspicious. It's suspicious. And so I would have them say the words suspicious. They say suspicious. And I say again, suspicious. And they say suspicious. And then I say suspicious, suspicious, suspicious. And then they have to say that exactly the same way, right? And it kind of makes them laugh a little bit because they're not really expecting it. And this isn't a huge thing. You don't have to plan this sort of thing, right? So this is just a very tiny way to integrate a little bit of fun and just kind of make them smile, crack that smile right in the middle of a lesson. So I do playful repetition a lot. I'll even change the tone. So I'll say suspicious, and they say suspicious. And then I say suspicious, and they have to say it the same way, right? So it's kind of making it a little bit silly. There's also exaggerated pronunciation. So if there is a sentence that you want to focus on, or even just making kind of a funny sentence, then you can discuss how changing the pronunciation or specifically the intonation even can affect meaning. So here's an example. Igor killed his wife with spaghetti, right? So this is an example of just a silly sentence, but then focusing on the stress but changing the stress in each sentence changes the meaning. Igor killed his wife with spaghetti? Igor killed his wife with spaghetti? Or just had dinner or something? Igor killed his wife or someone else's wife? Igor killed his wife with spaghetti, not his mom? Igor killed his wife with spaghetti, not for spaghetti or because of the spaghetti? And then Igor killed his wife with spaghetti, not a knife, right? So changing the intonation that way and then having them explain back to you what the differences could mean, again, is just one way. And then again, having them say it, right? So having them be the ones that give that intonation can be silly. And there's also things like invented words, or using words in ways that are maybe not meant to be used. So maybe I'm giving them a report and I'm like, ooh, this long report, this assignment you have to do feels really paperworky, doesn't it? Paperworky is not, of course, a word, but this brings attention to morphology and prefixes and suffixes that you can bring in. And if I say paperworky to someone, they're going to understand what I mean. It makes paperwork into an adjective, right? So putting those together and playing playful with language in that way, it draws attention to these focus on form aspects. The second notion that I want to look at is developing sociolinguistic competence or pragmatic competence. And this is because humor requires understanding of a specific tone or the relationship between the people that are speaking or implied meaning, appropriateness, right? Is it okay to say what you're saying to who you're saying it to or in that context? And also just social norms can be a very cultural thing. And through playful interaction, learners practice different voices, different identities, different perspectives, informal and formal language, so changing registers even, teasing, joking around, being ironic, parodying things, and interactional flexibility, being able to kind of jump from being serious to being joking to being back to serious, right? So having this flexibility. So this allows students to move beyond correct grammar and practice how language functions socially. And it's not always grammatically correct, right? So I want to give you some examples of activities that kind of tap into this idea of developing sociolinguistic competence or pragmatic competence. The first one is tone shift role plays. So this is when students receive a role play. It's the same scenario, but they need to perform it in different tones. So in my context, for example, police responding to a confused tourist, or police responding to an angry drunk at a bar, or maybe a police officer is working with a nervous witness. So first you have them perform the role play in a casual way. And then they do it again, but maybe in a more empathetic way. And then they do it again in a very overly formal way. And so this is going to allow them to practice register shifting and politeness strategies, emotional calibration, and interpreting social meaning. So it's not just the same dialogue over and over again. If they're working, with a confused tourist and they're being very casual, the language that they'll use, even their body language, is going to be different from being overly formal. So they need to go back to that scenario that they developed and work it out again, making those changes to fit the new tone. There's also character-based role plays. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this one. It's students just play a role, like maybe they are the angry drunk at the bar, or the nervous witness, or the confused tourist who is working with a police officer, or maybe even a suspiciously enthusiastic witness, who knows. But the point is that students are playing a role, and this creates a kind of psychological distance. So in this way, there's less personal vulnerability. I'm not acting as me in this role. I'm acting as this confused tourist. So there's some distance there. And because there's less personal vulnerability in this way, it can lead to a more willingness to speak. The last one is very low stakes, ridiculous reports. I really think that this is a great idea, especially in my context where students have to deal with reports all the time. And you can adapt this to whatever your context is. It doesn't have to be a report. It can be something specific. If, for example, if we're working with IT, um, if the air conditioner is broken at your school, you might put in a work order, right? So you might put in a request to the school to have them come and look at that air conditioning and have it fixed. So something that's like in the computer is broken, so they might have a work order that they need to come and help somebody with their computer. So for my context, ridiculous reports, it essentially what students would do is they would create and then respond to absurd but harmless incident reports. Like, for example, a neighbor reports a suspicious potato activity to the police. What's a potato activity? I don't know. Let the students figure it out. Let the students come up with those details. Or maybe a pigeon stole a man's wallet, not another person, a pigeon. So now they need to go and they need to show up and they need to interview this man about the pigeon that stole his wallet. And even another one could be someone was attacked by angry lasagna. Someone was attacked by lasagna. You can see I like pasta, right? So someone was attacked by lasagna. Yeah, the lasagna attacked me and it threw sauce in my face. And so they're still keeping this kind of functional and procedural language of dealing with, police reports and witnesses and interviewing. And so all of these sort of functional and procedural language is still happening, but this situation is slightly absurd and harmless. And so this can allow students to speak more freely. Mistakes feel less threatening because it's already absurd. And you might even get longer interaction from these particular activity. And the last part from research that I'd like to discuss is supporting and encouraging participation and how humor does this. So the way that I think humor does this is you have a serious scenario and a slightly absurd element, just like in those ridiculous reports I just mentioned. So students, again, are still practicing questioning, clarification, dispatch language, report language, language for de-escalation, all of maybe even some of the grammar points in particular that you targeted, past tense, narrative tenses of telling a story of something that happened. But the absurdity lowers that anxiety. It creates memorable interaction. Like, oh, I remember that Igor said this thing because Danilo was talking about spaghetti attacking someone, right? And so it becomes a little more memorable in that way. It also allows for improvisation, so students can get a little bit creative, a little more spontaneous, and that allows for that language to kind of more naturally pull out. And of course, it encourages participation because people are laughing. But it doesn't abandon that ESP, that professional language focus. So one example could be, if you give students a report that they need to respond to, or an incident that they need to respond to, or a report maybe an incident report they need to fill out, or any kind of police related incident that they would need to work with in some way. Here's one example. A drunk group of friends leave a nightclub, break into a nearby circus, steal a llama, and take it around the city on a local tram. Okay, there's lots of crime going on here. Maybe being too drunk in public, breaking into somewhere, stealing something, and then maybe bringing something that's banned or forbidden onto local transportation, like a llama. And there's also this example. A teenager throws an alligator through a drive-through window. What? Right? So something is still happening here. You have something that's dangerous, like an alligator, and then it's out of context. So it's not in a swamp or in the forest or in a river. It's now in a restaurant because it got thrown through a drive-through window. But I think what's really, really interesting about these two particular examples is that they really happened. These are real things that happened. So it's not difficult to find absurd things that have happened and bring authentic materials and authentic scenarios into the classroom in this way. So, especially the alligator one, this happened in Florida. Um, and I remember when this happened, it actually happened on my birthday in 2016. And I remember reading it in the news and it just stuck with me. So I can very easily just take this ridiculous thing that happened and bring it into the classroom and let the students work with it. It's not always something that you need to work really hard to make up. Just do a quick Google search. There's a lot of absurd things out there, as we all know. So there are some additional takeaways from research that I want to point out besides these three that I think are important to highlight about using play and using humor in education in the language classroom. So students often use humor themselves. They try to present themselves positively. They build relationships with their other classmates, right? So it's kind of building this classroom dynamic. I'm the funny guy, like me, you know. They're experimenting with different roles and different voices. They don't just have to be themselves, the student. They can now be the police officer or the angry tourist, right? So they can do all of these different things. And it also like moves them beyond that restrictive student role, as I just mentioned. But there's also some good things about it for teachers. So especially for teachers who play along, right? So maybe a student makes a joke in class and we might think, how dare you? Why are you taking attention away from the topic? What are you doing? Right? So we kind of get like, oh gosh, why did you say that? But if you play along, if you joke back with the students, and even if you are the initiator of the humor, especially this, then there are some benefits. It reduces the social distance and builds rapport with your students. I think that's one of the ways that I was able to build rapport with my students. I only saw them once a week for 2 hours each group. And so I would use humor and just playful and laughing just to kind of build that rapport a little more quickly. It does help to open students up to participate more, keeps their attention because they're laughing and they're like, what's going on? Wow, I didn't expect this. And it can still accomplish serious pedagogical work, as we saw from the activities that I discussed previously. And humor often emerges naturally during interaction. So, of course, we can have those planned fun activities that we weave into serious classroom tasks, but I think we should really jump on those moments of spontaneous, naturally occurring humor and play that happens in class and exploit it to our benefit. And humor often is often woven into serious classroom tasks. So this means it's just planned. So even though you're not doing a fun activity, you're still planning to have maybe a joke at this point in the serious task. Or you're doing a serious task, but you created an absurd situation, right? So you're still planning it. And interestingly, it serves as a kind of safe house. So when students want to safely experiment with their language, or maybe they want to try being an angry drunk, maybe they've never been an angry drunk before, but they want to try it. And even when they want to kind of send you an indirect message, they maybe want to critique some classroom norms, they can do so through humor without direct confrontation. And I'll show you an example of this a little bit later when I give you examples from my classroom. This happened one time. And lastly, it's important to remember that humor is not inherently automatically positive. It can exclude people, right? It can create those in-out groups. It can split the class. It can exclude one particular person or one particular group. It can be offensive. And then people might shut down if it's not used in the right way. And so because of this, I think as teachers, when we're thinking about humorous moments or playful things that we can do in class, it should be purposeful, it should be well thought out, it should be context sensitive. especially in our situation in Ukraine. There are some things we don't want to joke about. It should be inclusive, making sure that it's not singling out one particular person in class or one particular group. And of course, it should be supportive, something that everybody can joke about, but still be respectful, not mocking. So now I want to give you some examples from my classroom, some funny things that happened. And so one of them was repetition of vocabulary in funny ways. So I talked to you about the suspicious, right? So having them repeat suspicious and changing the tone and saying it really fast, and then say, oh, all the boys, suspicious, all the girls, suspicious, right? So you can play in this way just to kind of make them laugh because they're not expecting it. There was one particular incident. I had a student, Vitaly, he's so funny. He's very serious, very deep voice. And sometimes, as you know, with online interaction, we forget to turn our microphones on, right? So I would forget to turn my microphone on sometimes, and I would start talking. And Vitaly would say, microphone, microphone, just to get my attention. But there was one or two times that Vitaly also forgot to turn his microphone on. And so he started speaking, and I'd said, Vitaly, microphone, microphone. So I gave it back to him, and he laughed, and all the other students laughed. And that's just one unsanctioned moment of play and humor, but also kind of builds, rapport. And so this word, microphone, kind of became an inside joke with me and that whole class, because that's just how it was, just how it happened. And it was nice and natural. Also, just dropping an emoji, right? So even at the beginning of class, I might say, hey, students, welcome. How you feeling? Drop an emoji in the chat box. Let me know how you're feeling at the moment. And so then you would have them choose all of these, some of them just have a smiley face, but some of them are choosing the dancing lady. And it's like, okay, you feel like dancing right now. That's great. Or even transitioning between a different task. So, okay, we finished this task. Before we move on, let me know how you feel. Drop a chat box drop an emoji in the chat box, and then they have that opportunity. And you could also do it at the end of a lesson as well, just to kind of, break it up and let them express themselves. And how about you guys? Maybe you guys can drop an emoji in the chat or give a reaction right now. Let me know how you're feeling. Let's see what pops up. Oh, excellent. Got some, I love that. The face with the star eyes, I think, is my favorite. I use that one probably the most. Excellent. Heart eyes, lovely. Right? And so this is something that's just really simple, but kind of gets the students to jump out of that serious moment, check in with themselves, and express themselves in that way. Okay? So that's one thing. Another thing is, of course, explicitly encouraging creativity. So when they have to make sentences or a dialogue for some kind of role play or task, or if they're doing something with a digital tool, I'll challenge them. I'll say, okay, make me laugh, guys. Be creative. Make a couple serious sentences, but include a sentence that's going to make me laugh. I want to laugh today. Make it happen. I'm waiting. And so kind of encouraging them to be creative and find those absurd things. And then when you're going over it as the class with the whole class, you do laugh, and it happens a lot. I also did a murder mystery task. So tasks that are a little unpredictable. They don't know what's going to happen. It was a structured role play. So we've still got that planned role play element of it. I also did some games. So there's a game called Mafia. Maybe you're familiar with it. Semi-structured. So I did bring that into my classroom as well. And I want to give you more specific examples of these three right here. So first, encouraging creativity and productive tasks regarding the sentences, dialogues, and digital tools. So it's not always a humor that they come up with. So remember, before I mentioned the language and humor as being a safe house, right? So you have the students where you can see in the bottom right, these were the prompts that students needed to use to practice present simple. So they needed to say, as a police officer, I, and then something, something, and a police officer, something, 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 and the other cadets and I, something, 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 right? And so you can see that vulva, we had these three sentences that he created here, but this sentence in particular, he used as a humorous way to give that critique of classroom norms, right? So there, he's able to say, hey, I don't like that I have so much homework, but he did it in a way that's using kind of a little bit of humor here. He's just saying it like, huh, the other cadets and I have a lot of homework. I used present simple. That was the job, right? You told me to use present simple. I did it, right? I did the task, but it's got this little indirect message to it, and so you can see it and say ha ha ha, right? And maybe even talk about it. Oh, you have a lot of homework? Oh, well, maybe you should study harder and it will go faster or something. You can say anything that you want to respond to that. So that's just one example. Another example with dialogues, you can see here, my students had to create dialogues. This particular one was a police officer responding to some teenagers outside of a gas station who were smoking near a no smoking sign. And so you can see here that the students were pretty creative in the way that they kind of switched registers here. So you guys can't smoke here. This is a gas station. It's dangerous. Oh, really? We didn't see the sign. Yeah, we're just chilling, right? So this isn't something a police officer would say, but it's definitely something a teenager would say. And when they were performing this dialogue, right? So this is a role play that they had to do in class. You know, the students were saying, I was just chilling, right? And so it's kind of the way that they would say it was kind of humorous, and other students would smile because they're acting, right? I'm being this kind of rebellious teenager. And the officer here says, still not safe, right? Please put out the cigarette. And the teen, all right, calm down. So again, the student in class is saying, all right, calm down, right? Being dramatic in this way. So it's kind of fun. And so on and so on. So again, they're, having this practice with different roles, this practice with different registers, and when they're acting it out, they can be silly. And so it's kind of a nice thing, a nice way to integrate humor and playfulness into the classroom, even though they're doing a serious task. And lastly, you can see here, this was a dictogloss. So dictogloss, if you're not familiar with it, is a lovely activity. So I read students this short text. Okay, so it's something that I read to them out loud. It is not displayed on the screen. They cannot see it. They can only hear it. And I read it to them, and they need to take notes, but they're not writing every word. I'm not saying it slow enough for them to write every word. So they just have to take very quick notes, right? And so all the students are doing this individually. So I read this short text to all of the students. They take very quick notes trying to follow along. Then I put them into groups, and with their notes and what they can remember, they need to recreate the story. So they need to try to remember the details, the people, the color, how many, also the tense that I used, right? So even the words, for example. So you can see here, I said a bartender called the police because two drunk tourists were shouting and threatening each other. But the students here remember two drunk tourists were arguing. It's not wrong. It's not what I said, but that's great because I know now that the students understand what shouting and threatening each other is, right? There's still that similarity there. They're still following along. Here it says that suddenly one man threw his drink in the other man's face. And here it says one man threw his drink to another man. Okay, so they're getting it. They remember specifically the details of what happened, but maybe not exactly what I said. And that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. The point is for them to practice active listening. But what's interesting in this is that for the digital tool, because this is Padlet, right? So this is Padlet that I was using. These particular students, when they finished, they had a little extra time, and so they then decided to draw out exactly what happened at each stage, right? So we see here, the other man became angry and pulled out a knife, and here he is, right? So they were being playful in their downtime even. I allowed it, of course, because why not? And then when we share this whole thing as a class, students are kind of giggling. You know, you see this cute little kitty cat here, right? So it just kind of brings a little bit of lightness to the task that is discussing a very serious situation. The next thing I'd like to show you about engaging creativity in production tasks, or I'm sorry, encouraging creativity, was through certain activities themselves, of course. So I've had this alibi kind of role play game. And so what happens here is there are two groups, right? So there's a detectives group and there is a suspects group. And the only thing that's important to remember is if you have 4 detective groups, then you need 4 suspect groups, right? Or if you have, 36 students in your class, then you can have 6 suspect groups and 6 detective groups. So that just needs to be the same, right? So you can do this with large classes, you can do it with smaller classes. If you do it with larger classes, or if you have more groups and more suspects, of course, it takes a little bit longer. But so, for example, if you have 16 students here, you can see there are 3 groups of 4, right? So we've got 4, 8, 12 here, and then the other 4 as suspects, right? So you just want to make sure that however many groups there are, you have the same kind of number of suspects. So for the detectives, in their detective groups, I split them into their 3 detective groups, and I give them their detective card. So what this says is that they are detectives and they have 2 or 3 suspects. A witness saw those suspects at the scene of a crime, but they say that they went to the cinema, right? And so they need to ask the suspects questions about their day. And if there are any differences in their stories, then they'll know that they're lying. So the suspects, or sorry, the detectives work together at this point to prepare these questions, right? So they need to prepare these questions. Where and when did you meet? What was your friend wearing? What did you do before and after the cinema? And what can you tell me about the film? So these are questions that they have to ask. But when they're in their groups, they are also planning other questions, right? So it's a cinema, right? This is the topic, it's a cinema. So what other questions can you ask a suspect about being at the cinema? Oh, what movie did you see? How much did you pay for the tickets? What happened in the film? Who was the main character? What did you buy? Did you buy food or popcorn or something at the cinema, right? So they're thinking of all of these other questions that they can ask together. In the meantime, the suspects are all together in one group, and they are also planning. So they are planning answers to the same questions, right? They're planning questions, they're planning answers to the same questions, but they also have some extra ones, and they also need to anticipate the questions that the detectives might ask. So they say, oh, what if they ask about who was in the film? Or what if they ask about how much the tickets were? What should we say? Oh, okay, let's say they were whatever price, right? So they need to have the same answer to everything. So, okay, guys, where did we meet before? Okay, we met outside the movie theater. When? Oh, when did we meet? Okay, at 7:00, right? And so then what happens is all of the suspects are put into a group of detectives. So you have 3 groups. Oh, I'm sorry, this should actually be 4 groups of 3. I think I wrote that wrong there. I said it right, but I wrote it wrong, right? So that the same number of suspects and detectives needs to be. So we have 4 groups of detectives here. And then we have a suspect that gets put into each group. And they have to ask the suspect the questions that they prepared. And the suspect needs to answer their questions. And after some time, you can choose 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It changes according to how much time you have and how big your class is. But then all of the suspects will change and go to the next group of detectives, and they do it again. So the detectives ask the same questions, the suspects say the same answers, but there's going to be new questions that they didn't anticipate. And so, is there going to be any discrepancies? Are there going to be any lies? Maybe there was a question that the suspects didn't anticipate. Maybe the question was, who was sitting to your left? Who was sitting to the left of you in the cinema? Maybe they say one student, but then that student didn't say the same answer for them, right? So there's this kind of semi-structured where they have some questions that they need to ask, but there's also other questions that they can't anticipate and they can't plan for. So it creates a little bit of fun because they don't want to get caught, but they can be creative in their answers. And then in the end, when we're all talking and they're trying to find the lie, they're like, you didn't say that, you said this. And so it kind of gets competitive and it's fun. So that's just one example of an activity that is sanctioned play. I brought it in specifically for the students to have fun with, but there was also spontaneous and unsanctioned play that happened a lot in this game. Another one is a murder mystery task that I brought in. So this was the scene, this was the scenario. So students were at a 20-year high school reunion and they hear a scream from one of the classrooms. And a few minutes later, they find the dead body of one of their old teachers. But there's also some evidence that's left behind, a book, a photograph, and a handkerchief. And so there are some leads, right? We've got Will Brown, we've got Simon Kovalenko, we've got the initials IW over here, we have a photograph, right? So there's this language that's still being used, this functional language, this thematic language that's still being used. But this situation is, and it's pretty serious, but what they need to do is role play. So I give them, each person, a specific role card, right? So every single student has a different role. And they need to read their role very carefully and remember the details, but they can have the card in front of them. But they should not read their role card, right? They need to act it out. And importantly, the killer doesn't know that they are the killer. So one of the students is the killer, but as they're talking and interviewing each other, they're starting to realize, like, oh, I think I did it. I think I killed Miss Melnick. Right? And so here's an example of a role. I think you can still see my screen, right? You see Jordan King on the screen here. So you can see that the role is all of this. So they need to read this about their role. So I am Jordan King. Why was I at the party? My memories of Miss Milnick. She was the worst teacher. You hated school. You stopped going. You didn't graduate because you hated this teacher that died at this reunion. The last time you saw her and when you heard the scream. They also have the background information to help them remember the evidence and the scenario. And then when they get into groups, I put them into groups of just even numbers. Then they need to answer these questions. And so they're in the group and they're answering these questions together and they're acting out their particular role. And when they're doing this, they're taking notes about the person's name and the details that they were saying. And they've got some starter ones here that we look at as an example. So for this particular person, Jordan King, the students didn't say, you know, when they're in their groups and interviewing and acting, they didn't say, she was the worst teacher I ever had. She made me hate school, so I stopped going. They were acting. They were saying, oh, Miss Milnick, I hated her. She was the worst. I didn't like her at all. She wasn't nice. she was an evil lady, you know. So they're doing this kind of improvisation, even though they have a structure that and a kind of topic that they need to follow and a character that they need to play with these details, but they did it in their own voice. Right. And so that's kind of what made it a little bit more spontaneous in that way. And then they were acting that out, taking notes, listening to each other, and then the groups would change. So they answer the same questions with new people. They're interviewing again and again and again. So they're repeating their role and acting this multiple times, right? So it's not just one time and then they're done. They have to do it 2 or I think 3 or 4 times in my particular class, taking notes and figuring it out. And only one of my classes did figure it out. The other group didn't, but the second group did. And then there is the Mafia semi-structured role play. So maybe some of you know Mafia. I think the students probably, it's much easier to play in class, but it can be done online. I did it successfully multiple times. I'm happy to share that with you if that's helpful. Just let me know. But in Mafia, there are specific roles. So most of the students will be citizens. A couple of students, maybe depending on how many students you have, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4. I think I only had 3 though for my smaller group were the Mafia. I was the narrator, and we had 1 doctor and 1 detective, right? And so essentially what they're doing is that they cannot tell anyone their role. So I sent a private message to each student to tell them their role. And so you can see it here. And so essentially what needs to happen is the citizens need to find the Mafia people. That's their goal. They need to find all of the Mafia people, and then the citizens will win. But the Mafia people are trying to kill everybody else. And so if they are able to kill everyone without being found, then they win. This is something that you can Google. I think I do have a, I think actually it was a short YouTube video that I watched just to learn how to play it. And then I worked out how to do it online. So you could just Google how to play Mafia game and that will come up. But it's a semi-structured role play because students know their roles, right? But they were able to create their own stories, right? So when they're talking, all the students have to choose 1 Mafia person, and then once they've chosen, they have to decide why they think that is the Mafia person, and the Mafia person, the suspect, has to defend themselves. And so I had 1 student, Davey, he was talking, he's like, I can't be the Mafia because I'm just a humble pumpkin farmer and I just love my pumpkins. I would never kill anyone. And so this it just made me laugh, and I remember it because I'm a pumpkin farmer. That's so like specific and random. And so they're able to make up these fun and silly stories about why someone is guilty or why they are innocent. And in particular, I want to share with you a photo from playing this game. I had to take a picture of it because it was so hilarious. So all of the students in my class thought that this Sergei was the serial killer. And originally, it was Sergei's face. He just had his video open. And then he said, what do you mean? I'm not the serial killer. And then he changed his photo to this character from a movie. I don't know if you've seen this movie before, but this is a pretty popular movie. And this character is a very scary serial killer. And all of the students knew this movie. And so he said he was using irony here. He's like, what do you mean? I don't look like a serial killer, but then changed his actual photo to be a serial killer from a movie. And so you can see that a lot of the students thought that this was pretty funny, and we laughed, and it made me laugh really hard. I had to get a photo of it. But it's one of those situations, again, that happens naturally, wasn't planned, and creates a kind of rapport between the students and also with me. So final thoughts here. Even in serious professional ESP contexts, humor and play can support communicative risk-taking, sociolinguistic or pragmatic competence, development, participation and engagement can increase. And for me, especially with an online class, students that I can't be with, it builds rapport, not only between the students themselves, but of course between the teacher and the student. And humor does not have to undermine professionalism. It can humanize interaction and create space for meaningful communication, even within professional, serious contexts. So I think that in online contexts and conflict-affected learning environments, so that in person in Ukraine right now, these moments of connection and laughter and playfulness are especially valuable. And you can see here a photo of one of my groups. They got their certificates from the course, and the rector, lovely rector, presented it to the students, made them feel special, and it was a really great moment. And Marina shared these pictures with me, and I was so happy to receive them, so I had to share them with you too. Okay. So these are, this is the references of all of the research that was included in here. I did want to point out that a lot of some of the examples and the details of the research that I pulled are from the bold one here. So you could take a picture of it if you want to follow up and look at any of those a little bit more, or I'm happy to share them with you. And at this point, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to share. I'm happy to answer. So thank you very much as well for your participation and attendance.
Thank you, Heather. That was really magnificent presentation. Yeah, a lot of interesting tasks for our students, especially while our remote distance online learning. Yeah, a lot of, but really